Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Adi Redzic, the CEO of Think Change and life coach. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're innovating more than usual. And after this, you're going to be innovating even more.
For sure.
Hopefully.
And I think that you'll be able to motivate a lot of people and teach them some new things. And so one way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Something about myself that no one knows. That's a hard one. I'm pretty transparent. But I love to binge on Quora. Like that's how I fall asleep. I go and I read all kinds of random articles, anything that sparks my interest. And I just, dive deep into it.
That's interesting.
So I usually don't promote that because it's very, very nerdy.
I actually spent a lot of time on Quora, more in the sense of I wanted to build thought leadership. So I went on there every day to answer a question, at least one question, if not a few. And at this point, I've done at least 300 answers, something like that. And because of that, I have 450,000 views on that platform. It's weird.
That is awesome. I did something similar. I answered a few questions, including a story about Norman Borlaug that I wrote a few years ago. And I don't know, I forgot the number, but I think there were thousands, if not over 100,000 views on that. And I was like, all right, well, I did my contribution from Quora and I'll do something else.
Yeah. That's crazy though.
It's a cool platform.
It really is. And I don't think it's too nerdy, the fact that you like to binge on that a bit, because it's just one of those things where it's fun to answer questions, especially when you feel like the kind of person who likes to teach. And I feel like that's what you kind of are too, that kind of didactic person.
I am. I like to, it's always been since I was a kid. I love to kind of, I learned it. So how do I teach it? But also how do I teach it to people so they actually really get it? So it resonates, right? So break it down as simple as possible.
Right. Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast interviews and discussions. So you got your personal brand and Think Change going on, but what got you started before all that? What was your mindset?
So I have a quintessential immigrant story, right? I came to the US with $300 and a dream. I was a 17-year-old. I wanted to make it here. I grew up in the Balkans during the civil wars and genocide in the 90s, which meant I grew up fast. And since I was, 6 or 7, I tried to solve problems, financial problems, conflict. I didn't understand why people wanted to kill us and so forth. So that started me early, and I was all about service and making my mark, right? Changing the world. So then when I got here, I was very driven. Of course, with $300, good luck getting into a school, into a college that will, that you can pay for. So I fundraised for myself. I checked 150 colleges in the US. Out of those 150, 2 came my way and were willing to work with me. So when I got to college, I was like, all right, this is my platform. And then from there, I did so much. I mean, I was an overachiever. I, studied all these different things. I was involved a lot. I managed $1.7 million budget. I had, for one of the divisions of the college, I ran a newspaper on a campus with Dow journalism program. I had a huge team. So we did a lot of great things. And so after that, and this is like at the time of that Great Recession, like a week after I was done with college, I got an invitation to help turn around the Center for Spirituality, Leadership, and Service. And I signed up because, I'm a leader. I'm going to make these things happen. This is my jumping stop where I'm going to learn stuff, make things happen. And from there, I was going to go to law school and then run for office. That was the dream, right? As a kid, I saw all those conflicts. I saw the government issues. I also was involved with United Nations, UNICEF programs. So I felt that's my path. Except during those 2 years while I was running the center, there was both a personal transformation that took place, but also I kind of realized, certain things in terms of my skill. We used that, my mentor and I, who I was working with, we used those 2 years to condense what somebody might learn in 40 years. We used it to condense in 2 years. So I would read a couple books a week at least. There was so much pressure to perform, to make things happen. On Monday nights, I cleaned toilets as part of the, leadership growth. But all of that led to me kind of talking to different people. People asked me for advice, and I just kind of started coaching people, and I fell into it. I didn't know what coaching was. I did. At the same time, I like, obviously that's why I'm on your Polycast. I like doing several things. So I was building a financial literacy think tank. I moved to Chicago for grad school. And that's where Think Change started happening as a consultancy, consulting and coaching in various areas. And it was sort of a boutique kind of thing as a side, in addition to my other projects. But then that got a life of its own, speaking gigs, more clients, books, and here we are today.
That's crazy. And I think that too, are you still planning on being a politician at some point?
When I look at the political landscape these days, the answer is no. Because I believe, I studied politics, including American political thought in particular. And so when I believe there's a statue of Sam Adams in Boston. He's standing like this, and it says, statesman, courageous and incorruptible. And I tend to believe in that. That said, in this world, it's very, very difficult. It's not impossible. It's very, very difficult to follow that path. So my work with financial literacy led me to meetings at the White House, led me to meeting members of Congress, other elected officials, both state level and federal. And that showed me that I can actually make more difference in another way. And that's where I kind of stepped back from that.
No, I like that. You kind of felt more of a better fit that way. And what's interesting is that I just finished a show with my roommate called The Expanse, where the United Nations actually becomes the global leading government, and all the other kind of national governments kind of subsided to that. And so it's interesting how the UN has the potential to be such a global leader in such a way. I don't know. I just thought that might be interesting to go off of with you.
It is interesting. And, the UN, when FDR created a concept, of course, started with Wilson, the League of Nations and everything, but that was not executed well. FDR was a lot better administrator, including his wife, Eleanor, who was fabulous in many ways. The idea was that this entity exists and is used in many ways as an arm of the United States and sort of the Western world during the Cold War and stuff, to keep the balance of power in the world and peace and do a lot of good. But like anything else, especially these days, it would need transformation. It needs, for sure, some help.
I totally understand it. I think it's one of those things too, where we need to make significant difference, not just on a national level, but global level, and how we think about government.
Absolutely.
How it works. Yeah.
There is it's really about people of goodwill coming together and recognizing that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. We can it can be a win-win, especially over time. And that especially when we look at things like climate change and so on, those are collective issues, and collectively we can do so much more. But that requires, good leadership, and that seems to be quite rare these days at that level anyway.
Maybe you and I will fit that mold down the line, something like that. So digging into the questions here, what was it like working with CEOs or even like high-level government officials too?
It's fascinating because there's a lot of diversity in many of CEOs, depending on what they're doing, what their background is, and the motivations. At the same time, they're just as human as anybody else. And I've always had this knack, whoever I'm meeting with, they put their pants on in the morning just like I do. They're in the sense we're at the same level. So I level with them and I talk to them, especially in a coaching setting. A lot of times there's that loneliness and there's that a sense of being misunderstood, but having enormous amount of pressure. And so what I do is we spar. I compare coaching to sparring in martial arts or boxing. And I spar with CEOs and we handle whatever the challenges are. And some days those are really, really small challenges. You would never think a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company would have that problem. And other times they're much more complex issues and or like you have two really compelling choices and you don't know which one to follow. Like I'll never forget one time I had a client, a CEO of a startup that was really taking off, and he comes to my office. We were in the same building, and he's like, I got an offer to sell my business for $20 million. this morning and I have to give an answer. And what do I do? And so there's me there, right? And I'm thinking, well, it's not up to me to give you the answer, but I can help you discover what's the best answer for you. So it's really interesting. And I love working with people who are ambitious, but who also recognize they need to keep growing, because there's so much opportunity to discover things, to innovate, to just get better at life and business.
Well, and I think you kind of alluded to the idea too of like maybe some politicians not wanting to grow, or kind of getting down the rabbit hole of it might have been corrupted or something like that, which we're not necessarily going into per se, but it's more of the idea of just the fact that they kind of got in that stagnant mindset where they're not trying to grow anymore. And there's a lot of people who can benefit a lot from that growth.
Absolutely. And it's about fear, right? So people are afraid to lose the identity, and they have a very narrow outcome, and there's the selfishness involved. There's that zero-sum game, them versus us, me versus him or her. And that kind of thing puts people in a corner. And whenever people are cornered, they act out of their worst impulses. Right. Growing, having a proper reflection, having people challenge you and you be willing to take challenges allows people to elevate themselves above that and follow the, quote unquote, better angels of their nature. So that way they can effectively be leaders. You're not a leader if you have a title. And many politicians, they have a title, but they lack leadership because that narrow-mindedness, they might win right now, but collectively we're losing. And this is on any side of the spectrum.
Oh, for sure. And then, so what does it mean to be a strong leader then?
So I like to use the term great leader as opposed to strong. Because strength is required for leadership, especially for great leadership, right? Because you have to be able to make decisions that are maybe not the best for you, but they're best for the people you're leading, right? So a great leader paves the way where there wasn't none. A great leader brings people together. A great leader has an influence that is meant to outlast him or her. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jim Collins, but he has a great book, Good to Great. It's sort of a staple in the management world. He talks about level 5 leadership, which is that powerful paradox of personal humility and professional will to accomplish things. Personal humility helps take people along with you. You don't have to scare people into having them follow you. You don't have to divide and conquer kind of thing. You simply have a vision that is so compelling. Your humility means people can relate and they know you're going to take them to a good place. And yet your personal will and professional will allows you to, pave that path to a better life, to a better business, to whatever it might be. Right. So I would say that's what makes a great leader. Of course, there's how do you get there? Big thing is self-awareness. Big thing is understanding you actually don't know as much as you think you do. And it's the ability to kind of, I think what makes unique managers and leaders really, really great is if you can see the big picture. So you can go up, 30,000 miles above or 30,000 feet above and you look down. At the same time, you get down into the weeds of everything. So that's strategy, tactics, an ability to kind of oscillate between the two without disruption makes for excellent leaders.
For sure. And actually, I was talking about this on the Polycast, one of the micro episodes recently of micro and macro focus, which is kind of just talking about that, where you have to sometimes think of the big picture, but also the micro details. And this was more in the sense of like becoming a polymath or someone who's expert in many different areas. And this kind of idea of which one do you work on first? Which one do you have to work on now? You can't really do all of them at the same time. That's not really what a polymath is. Someone who's able to do one thing or the other, but is really high level. So that idea of focus and when and how you should focus is key. And I think that kind of resonates with that.
Absolutely. You have to know what the priorities are and what decisions should be at your desk and what decisions shouldn't. And that's where the delegation comes in. That's where understanding what are the important tasks, not just urgent, not distractions, but what's really important.
Yeah, definitely. And so you were mentioning self-awareness earlier too. How can we reprogram our minds to achieve what we want?
So I love that question because that's So we are programmed within the first 7 years of our life. So 95% of who we are is kind of, we're a sponge that collects whatever we're surrounded with, whether it be trauma, whether it be certain experiences, certain beliefs. It doesn't mean the parents and other caretakers don't do their best. It just means it's a mixed bag. And so when we get older and we want to grow as individuals, as leaders, as polymaths, we have to, it really starts with taking the time to get to know ourselves, and then recognizing what are the things we're believing in, and then challenging those things. I wrote a blog post about that, right? You know, I'm a big fan of Star Wars, you know, Yoda, you got to reprogram yourself. So there's sort of steps to it. But the biggest one is you figure out what is it you believe in, and then you challenge that. Is this what I really believe, or is this something someone else taught me? And how do I feel about that today? And then you watch for the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias meaning our brain gets so many sensations every single day, so it filters it by looking for the same or similar experiences and facts and data that will confirm what we already believe in. That is why things like racism persists, because so many people look for the same data that affirms with the same beliefs, as opposed to challenging it so they can kind of open their mind. Challenging breaks that that structure. And then you replace it. You look at what makes more sense to replace it, and that's where the reprogramming comes in. What serves me better? That kind of thing.
Well, and it seems that you're combining that self-awareness with critical thinking too. And that's how you get past those biases, is being able to think critically about how am I thinking? Like, am I thinking biasly or biased? Like, am I being biased in this thought process? And how can I get around that?
Absolutely. So that's where you ask yourself, is what I'm thinking true? And this is a very fundamental thing when it comes to even, you know, life coaching. If I have self-defeating beliefs, narratives, there's a point where I have to be self-aware and recognize, oh wait, I'm listening to this stuff and I'm believing it. And then at some point you look at it and you say, well, is this really true? Is what I'm thinking really true? And that is where the critical thinking comes in. The moment we start asking those questions is the moment when that's the seed we plant for transformation.
So a good thing to kind of mention here is I took a class last year actually on critical thinking. And one of the first things we learned was question the credibility of the source. If something seems off, look at the source of where that information comes from and see if that person's credible or that organization's credible. One day I was driving to one of my clients and I thought on the radio I had heard, no, it's on TikTok, not even on the radio, on TikTok, I had heard from a police officer on there that wearing a mask while driving is not wise because then you get more carbon dioxide trapped in that one enclosed space. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, and I still haven't looked it up myself, but I was driving in my car and I'm thinking to myself, I only know that information because of one video on TikTok on a platform that cannot be true. It's not really consistently though. And so I need to make sure I look it up myself and confirm, am I being biased just because I heard it once and now anyone else is wrong, or am I wrong?
Right. And that's the humility, right? And that's something I see a lot. I do a lot on social media, which drives people crazy. And I try, for my own health, I try to step back from it, but I see things and I just ask, what's your source on this? I'd like to check it out. Or when people say, oh, did you listen to this politician or this statement? I'm like, yeah, I actually looked at the transcript. I prefer to see the transcript so that way there's no ambiguity of what I'm witnessing. And a lot of people don't like that, but that is the essence of critical thinking. Well, let me dig into this. Let me understand where it comes from. Has it been tested? What does it mean? And I can still believe what I believe, but I'd like my beliefs to be rooted in truth. Yeah. And that's where the whole, if we can't pursue the truth, then we're just delusional.
Yeah. Have you reprogrammed your mind?
Yes. And it's a constant process, right? But I definitely have done that. I think I did that throughout several experiences in my life that were very difficult. I kind of drove me to do that. My grandmother, for example, she raised me. So after she died, I experienced depression. I didn't know what that was in Montenegro at the time. So where I grew up, they didn't exactly, they thought, I'm just a kid sad about grandma dying, but I went really, really deep with that. many years later, so when I was running that center that I made a reference to, we were externally, I was very successful. We were raising money. We were having all these programs. Mayor of the city knew me by my first name. I was running this very large service event, 3,500 or 3,200 young people, 48 organizations. So, I'm this like up and coming Fortune 15 leaders, as they called me at the time. Yet internally, I was feeling miserable. So I found myself at the floor of my apartment with a bottle of Jack Daniels, drinking from the bottle. And I was, so externally, there's all this success. Internally, I was feeling miserable. I was overweight. A relationship had collapsed. I felt very lonely, rejected. And in that moment, I realized I hated myself. And so, because I realized none of these external successes translated into internal peace, they never do. And so I started figuring out, I owned that, right? I owned the fact that I was hating myself, and asked myself, well, how do I go from self-hatred to self-love? I did also contemplate, well, do I continue this life or do I end it? I'm way too curious to see what happens with my life. So at that point, thankfully, I decided, of course, I just want to figure out how to live differently. Right. And that required programming. That's when I started observing the narratives I believed about myself, that I was running away, that some of my successes weren't truly my successes as much as they were reactions to my experiences, searching for love, searching for acceptance, searching for goodness from other people and internally, and falling short. The whole idea of not good enough, the idea that even if you're doing all these things, still it may not work out, all those different things. And so that moment led to, okay, I got to change these things. So I came up with the concept at the time of, I was like, okay, to get to self-love from self-hatred, I can't just do that. They just don't do like, okay, I'm just going to love myself now. There's a process. And so it started with me moving from self-love to say, okay, before you love something, you have to like it. Before you like it, you have to believe it's good. And so I delved into the idea of fundamental goodness, and the idea that when I was a kid, I was born, any kid that's born is perfect just the way it is. It doesn't try. Just like the universe doesn't try. The universe just is. And so I connected with that, and I decided that I was fundamentally good. I challenged all these thoughts, and none of those were strong enough to combat this idea. And at that point, I actually got a license plates that said I am good on them, because I wanted to see it at least twice a day, and then get into my car and take that moment just to internalize that goodness. And that kind of started building, because when you feel that, then you can forgive yourself for what you think are failures or shortcomings and so on. And then you just build and build, and then over time you realize it's become a core belief, and that creates strength, internal strength. So that kind of program was very, very extreme. Of course, there's a lot of smaller stuff that I've done, but that is very quite a transformation.
Yeah. Well, and it seems too that you had to take a moment to identify whether or not you were good, even though you are good, and I can tell that you're good, and I'm sure the audience might be able to too, but having that self-awareness of it and being able to internalize it, like you're saying, is the real key factor. And this example I'm going to use is trivial compared to what you just said there, but I think it's unique in a way that Fallout, for example, a video game, there's a karma chart where they have the lawful good or chaotic evil, and kind of all in between. So they have the lawful neutral and then lawful chaotic neutral. These are kind of this 9-tier chart. And I remember playing the game, and when you play the game, you can choose which path you take. And depending on which path you take, you get a completely different game. And I told myself, okay, I'm going to go in there and be as evil as possible so I can get that other part of the story and see how it is. And I found myself, once again, choosing all of the good options and not able to, like, literally, even in an experimental task, choose the bad options to play the second part of the game. And I thought that was kind of a unique experience. I was like, hey, like that means that my internal choices are that kind of good aspect.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when you are willing to wrestle with this negative or not so much supported, you actually live with that. I talk about it like having a drink with your demons, right? When you sit with all these tough, the evil narratives and you're willing to even attempt to engage in, that's when you get to know yourself better and you realize, well, actually, that's not my cup of tea. You realize which choices you prefer. And then that just it gets a life of its own, and it's self-validating, right? You start realizing, well, yeah, it's core. The core is good. So of course my actions are going to flow from that.
Yeah. Now, pivoting a bit here, there was a term that you used on your blog called, so I was going to ask, what is entreployment?
Entreployment, so it's the idea, so a lot of people want to build their businesses. A lot of people want to be entrepreneurs, work for themselves. And actually there's some research out there that shows that by 2040, we're going to have about, 75, 80% of US workforce is going to be independent contractors. Now, that's going to have significant effect on the government and the government's systems and so on and services. But what does that mean, that urge for people to self-actualize? How can we create environments within organizations that allow people to be entrepreneurs but still have predictability? Because lack of predictability is what stops so many talented people from taking the leap, right? If you need to feed your family, you want to have your own business, but if you don't have a way of, you don't know where your paycheck is going to come from, most people don't give that a shot. But what that means is that there are dreams that die within people. That's not going to change because that aversion to, a risk that people have, including entrepreneurs, is going to limit people. So how do we change that? Can we create organizations that offer that kind of flexibility, offer that kind of encouragement, empowerment, so people can feel ownership in the business and give the way they would to their own business, and then they get the benefits, including that predictability, stability, but also whether it be stock options or just a great pay, flexibility, when they want to work, when they don't want to work, what makes sense for them to be productive, all kinds of things, right? And we have examples of that. So G Suite, that's so popular. It was started because Google used to have a policy. I'm not sure whether they have still, but they had a policy, 10% of the time of its programmers and so on can be spent on their own projects. They can do whatever they want or nothing, entirely up to them. Well, Gmail came as a project that was sort of not assigned, not part of the job. It was a separate thing. Now imagine if we harness people's creativity and allow people to feel invested and feel part of their, they're really there, they belong.
Yeah.
The productivity and just the quality of organization will just go up. So that's where Entreployment, I call it, comes in.
Yeah, I love that. And it kind of reminds me of the idea of the entrepreneur, someone who's innovating from the inside the company. And I actually had an experience with my own first job company where the logo that we use for the building that we're in, that is the company essentially, I work for the city, is just 13 years old, maybe even longer than that, and has never changed, never evolved, not even changed colors or anything like that over the past over a decade now. And we've had issues with people coming in and not having enough traffic to build up revenue and income for the company, for the city, I guess, at this point. And so we've struggled with that. And I actually, just for the fun of it, made a new logo for the brand that matched the architecture of the building and tried to give it a more creative taste to it. And the head boss of the building wouldn't even look at it, wouldn't even acknowledge it, completely stomped on any kind of idea of entreployment and taking up a new step in my own degree. And I think that's just if we could change how people's perceptions of how employees can be, like you're saying, is very cool.
And so that is a beautiful example of what needs to change. That's a very old mentality of it wasn't part of your job, what are you doing? But think about this. What would that, so you invested yourself, your time, your energy, you were passionate about this idea. Even if it doesn't change, even if the boss ultimately said, you know what, to change in a city structure, it would require all these processes. It's not a fight I want to fight right now, but you know what, this is awesome. And I love what you did. That would be a validation for you to feel valued, to feel important, to know that your work is you're not a monkey who's just doing some whatever, but you're actually a valued member of the team. It doesn't matter which level, even if you're, intern, it doesn't matter. That's bad leadership, just flat out. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying that this person is not trying, would not want to be a good leader, and in many ways, maybe he or she is. It's that they were taught this blinders, keep the blinders, just focus on this thing. The problem is with blinders, we don't, if Henry Ford kept the blinders on, he would have created a faster horse. Well,
Yeah.
not create, but,
Yeah,
wouldn't create a
exactly.
car. So that's, so Entreployment would fight that. It's a
Mhm.
nature, it's a culture that fosters innovation. Not all ideas are great. Not all ideas will go forward, but people will feel like they belong.
Yeah.
And that means you don't have to, they don't have to clock in. They're going to do the work.
I'm glad I shared that story because your response was a perfect version of like, yeah, exactly. And it's kind of interesting too, because that same company, I had almost 8 positions at one point at the same
Wow.
time. And that kind of leads into the whole polymath idea. But it's just one of those things where I was dedicated to that building enough to where I wanted to do it as much as I can for it. And never anything came from it. I loved the experience of it, and that was exhilarating. But yeah. So between,
A great organization would have kept you
yeah.
and
Well,
given you more opportunities.
thank you. And I think that considering that my diversification, it also leads into the question about your diversification. So between
Mm-hmm.
speaking, authoring books, and even now too, no less, and blogging and coaching, there is a lot to your life. How do you balance it all?
So I believe we have one life. So when people talk about my professional self and personal self, it's just one.
Hmm.
And so I design life in order to incorporate the things I love. And so that's why my tagline these days is, live a life, or have courage to design and live a life you love. Because what else are you going to do if you can't invest in your life like that? So the way I do it is, it's very much, I manage myself, my energy levels and so on, then match these various things I love. So I love coaching, I love speaking, I love writing. And so I allot my time accordingly. And so it doesn't feel, and because my work most of the time does not feel like work, like it's not, it just, oh, I'm just living and I'm enjoying this. It's a fairly easy sort of a balance. And I also have another kind of formula, it's 80-20, meaning that, or 75-25, you have to enjoy whatever it is, however you're spending your days. You want to enjoy at least 75% of it. If you don't, you need change
Yeah.
right away. And 25%, we all have things that we have to do we don't necessarily like. We might not hate them, but that's where it falls in. Like cleaning your house, you might not enjoy it, but you're going to do it. So
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of nuance to that. In fact, it relates to one of the later questions that I want to get into. But actually, before I do that, so it's interesting because like right before our interview call, you talked to me about like tell me your story, that kind of thing, and I told you how I built PolyInnovator to be the
mhm.
foundation for all the careers that I want to work in life. And that's exactly what you're saying there, designing the life that you want to live. Even if it doesn't work
Mhm.
out, you're setting the groundwork for something else to work out. So kind of like what you're saying there, you wanted to become a politician, or at the very least that's what you thought you wanted to do, and it led down the coaching path instead. You designed a platform that ended up evolving differently.
That's, and I still believe that. So if I, for example, tomorrow wake up and I don't feel like, I'm not happy coaching, I don't feel satisfied, I don't feel fulfilled, I'm gonna go do something else. I will go flip burgers. That's okay. So it's very much what I'm pulled to do. A few years ago, I had my alma mater called me up under my undergrad. They asked whether I would manage international student mobility, admissions, recruitment, financial aid, programming, everything. I was like, yeah. It took me away from the path in terms of my business. I had to put certain things on hold, but it was like you're talking about, right? Variety of interests and careers. It felt something very personal. I loved that place where I, went to college, and it also felt very much a full circle when I got to sign letters and give scholarships to international students.
Yeah.
I was there for a year. We created the most diverse class in the history of the school because it came from a place of love and enjoyment. And I didn't mind that I went, traveled around the world like crazy hours, went to, some places in China that people rarely go. I had these amazing experiences, top experiences, but I love them all. And
Right.
then I moved back to doing what I'm doing. Tomorrow, if I'm called to serve in another way, if it makes sense, I will do it. I will answer the call.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of polymathic traits in there too, where you're able to find the balances between different areas and find those linking connections. So something I ask all my guests actually is, what is a polymath to you?
So that I actually struggled with that because I heard a lot of people talk about focus, right? You have to stay in your lane. You have to get really your niche and get really, really focused. And this is especially hard when you're in a field of bettering people and organizations. There are a lot of different topics. And in fact, I get those marketing requests a lot, people telling me they're gonna make me all this money for me, whatever. And one of the people asked me a question, and I tried to engage out of respect, and curiosity and whatnot. So he asked me a question. Well, what do you coach in? So what kind of coaching do you do? And so I listed several things, and the response was, "Oh wow, that's a lot of specializations. You sure you can do that all?" Well, yeah, actually I can,
Yeah.
because in order to have a holistic growth, which is what I believe in, I have to have enough skill in each of these areas. Otherwise, I will betray my clients, because success in one area affects success in the other, and they pull on each other. So
Ooh.
polymath to me means being able to allow your growth, allow your learning and interest to flourish. They might not be at the same time always. So that's, a good friend of mine has a song, you can have it all, just not at the same time. So you got to sequence some of the things, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue them. So topics that are very, very interesting to me, I delve into them, I wrestle with them, and it doesn't matter. I didn't study them in college, or I didn't used to like that topic 10 years ago, but now I do. Those things are irrelevant. So what polymath means to me is, Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance man and women, right? So the idea that you're a forever learner. You teach yourself things, you go to seminars, you work with a coach, you read books, you listen to podcasts or polycast, you just allow your brain to flourish, you maximize its potential. And some of the brightest and most successful people in history were essentially didn't create rigidity and limits to themselves. They said, okay, this seems interesting, let me learn it. And I struggled with that. Again, society, narrows in. If I listened to my father, I would have been an engineer. Bad idea. Yeah. But that's for you. That's my interpretation of it is, this seems interesting, let me discover it. And I am curious. So I want to find out how a mug is made, for example, and I dig into it.
You should look into how a pencil is made. It's fascinating. There's like a single pencil.
I feel like I've read
there was a video or something like that. Yeah. And it's like, it takes like 10,000 people just to be able to make one pencil. It's weird. And it's just an interesting concept too. I always like the answers I get from that question, because whenever someone talks about polymath, they think, oh, it's a lack of focus. It's like a generalist or jack of all trades, which are almost lower tiers on the spectrum, so to speak. But a polymath is someone who's literally knowledgeable and is a multi-specialist. It's not just someone who is an anti-specialist in a way. And so I think it's interesting how you're talking about that narrow blinders, so to speak. People see the term polymath, let alone the actual act of becoming one, narrowly. And we mentioned earlier the big picture and nitty-gritty details, getting into the dirt. You need both, especially to become a polymath, let alone a specialist too. I do think there is a need for specialists out there, and especially for like medical fields and lawyers, but even those fields can benefit from having interdisciplinary people. But it's interesting how you do have to have the self-awareness, like, what do I need to focus on? What do I want to focus on? What am I curious about right now? And then have the micro focus of pursuing that day, that week, that month, and then over the next coming years, choosing which kind of big path is the most important.
That's exactly. And I think I agree with you. So you have to have the specialization is where, like you said, polymath is not a jack of trades, a little bit of everything. The idea is that you actually delve into it. So a specialist in medicine, absolutely, we need specialists and we need people to be at the top of their game, like that pursuit of excellence, right? The idea is that you don't have to just do that. You can be a specialist in something else too. And not everything we do for a living has to be, not every interest has to be what we do for a living. So I can tell you British history and royal history and all that stuff. I can take any exam. I'll beat anybody on it, right? Yeah. I love history, so I love that. I'm not that's not my job these days.
Yeah.
I'm not making money off of it. Same thing with government policy, all those things I can do. Those are interests. And I went really deep with them. I allowed myself to nourish those talents. Doesn't mean I have to make money off of it or make a living off of it.
Right. For example, with PolyInnovator, I learned a ton about SEO marketing, like getting that search engine optimization and digital marketing in general, so social media stuff too. I'm not interested in working in that field. I know it's just as much as someone who's at college for it, maybe even more considering I've practiced it much more since college graduates don't usually get the chance to practice it. But it's not something I'm going to go pursue. It was something I was curious about, especially for my own personal gain, but I don't have to go and do it.
Right, and it's that idea, I forgot the name of the essay by Emerson. It's, I think
Self-reliance? No, that's a book.
It's not self-reliance. It's a American, I don't know, it's not a citizen. It's a student or something. It was in a graduation speech he gave. And he talks about this idea of learning for the sake of learning. You're not learning just to get from point. That's why education has failed so many people, formal education, because they focus on, you get to college, you're supposed to get the job. Afterwards, you get, marry, have 2.5 kids, pick a fence, and then naturally so many people are miserable and have midlife crisis and whatnot, because college did not teach people, or even high school, rites of passage. How do you grow into this very well-rounded, open-minded human being who always seeks to better themselves? And that's what I believe in. I think that's where polymath mentality comes in. You're not stopping the learning. I mean, Bill Gates is one of those people. If he has any topic that he's interested in, he reads everything possible on it. Warren Buffett, the same thing. He says, if you're interested in 20 things, write them out, cut them in half, focus on the top 10. He didn't say focus on one thing, but all these other things.
And I think that's a good point there too. Is like, there is as multi-potentialites. I think we both would consider ourselves multi-potentialites, and people with the potential to do many different things. We're going to be curious about a lot of different things. And there's no one thing that might be better to learn than the others. If we both want to learn about carpentry or learn about electrical wiring, it doesn't really matter per se which one we want to learn, but we always have to have some sort of choice. There is opportunity cost to being a polymath. Maybe I need to make a video on that one day. The opportunity cost of a polymath. There you go. Yeah. But and sorry too, my chair made some noises there. But it was interesting because, like you said, you do have to cut it down a little bit. If you have 20 different things you want to go into, that's being a jack of all trades there. You're not going to get very far. You're going to get maybe novice level at max for most of those, but you do have to dig deeper than that. You do have to get more detailed than that.
Right, and you just pick, you pick those, and you sort of figure out what makes most sense to you at that point in your life. I have a good friend. She and I always talked about how in our 70s, we might go get a master's in divinity or something, and then she would be working at her bookstore, right? At that time, used books bookstore or something was the dream at the time. So it's the idea of making a rich life, but yeah, of course, you have to narrow and zero into one thing at a time that is most pressing, and then you move to other areas.
For sure. And so speaking of points in life, what might be the hero's journey of a polymath be?
That's interesting. So, it's answering this call. So having this draw, so that's where the hero's journey starts. You're drawn to a particular topic and you answer the call, and then you start realizing there's several, and instead of shoving yourself down, usually it's because you get a coach or you get a mentor or someone to help guide you through it, that you kind of take the leap, right? You jump into that area, and then there's that moment of major pain, and the pain is usually maybe quitting your job. The pain is explaining to your family why, how come you're quitting this very perfect path in your life in order to pursue what really matters to you, or shifting careers completely. There's a lot of negative pressure, and that's what in the hero's journey, that's a moment that polymath experiences, and that's that darkness, right? That's the struggle that ultimately finishes the circle. A polymath, if they're able to resist that and go through the struggle, they're transformed. And then of course there's the next next cycle that comes in. I think in many ways that call is usually honoring yourself, and that can be really, really difficult for people. And so for many people, and so including polymaths.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's two kind of polymaths too. There's the inherent polymaths. Like I've always felt drawn to
Mm-hmm.
that. And I've always known that I'm probably going to do something like that in life. But there's other people too, I think, that are not polymaths by nature, but by either force, like that's how their college was. Like they got many different experiences in college and then pursued that with their jobs. Or like I have this idea of like many people are polymaths without realizing it because they did
Mm-hmm.
40 years at one company, but they worked 4 or 5 different careers within that company.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time they're 80 or 90, they're already a polymath by nature and just by experience, not by nature, but by experience. And so I think that the hero's journey is interesting too, because it's that multiple journeys on top of each other that creates those careers, that creates the polymath life. Because you wouldn't necessarily define yourself a polymath early in life, but more so by the end of it, a lifelong journey,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak.
Well, because you don't even know what that means. You're just
Mm-hmm.
curious about different things. And then if you have the environment that hones that, that encourages you to hone it, that it nurtures that, you're more inclined to be that way. Some of us, like you said, are more naturally inclined to be that way. So even if the people around us are telling us, no, don't do it, don't be this way, focus on one thing, we might still pursue our thing. Others, I mean, you hear so many stories. People get a particular job or they're in college, they take this class and they're so mind blown by it that they shift careers. Doesn't mean, or shift the path, doesn't mean they're not interested in what they were doing before. It just means they're also interested in something else.
Right.
So I think that's a great way of kind of creating distinction between natural versus what was the word you used? Like
Just kind of experienced in that way.
experiential, right?
Yeah, experiential. Yeah. Well, and before I move on to the next question there, because it's an interesting question, it reminds me of Steve Jobs. Like he
Mm-hmm.
he quit college and he took a calligraphy class just
Yeah.
out of pure curiosity, not because he did the class in his like routine. And it was interesting because he changed his entire perspective on the next computer that he was going to make with Apple because of that, and that changed his entire viewpoint on typeface and stuff like that.
Yep, that's, I mean, absolutely, I love that story, right? And he's an example of someone who studied and learned so much. So he was big into spirituality and Buddhism, he was, meditation, things like that, but he was also obviously a technological wunderkind in many ways, and a sales guy and a marketer, very unique. So, and he went deep in all of those areas. Could he have been better in some other ways as a leader and a human being, perhaps? Yes, like all of us. But that's a great example of you see something you're interested in, and then it kind of defines your life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you've also mentioned earlier the 80-20 kind of rule. Where does Pareto's principle come into your life then?
So it's very simple. It's I write a to-do list and I take the 3 to 5. That's sort of my 20% of the most impactful things that I need to do, and I focus on those. And if I accomplish those any given day, I feel great. Or any of those. So when I work with people and they tell me I have this long to-do list, I'm really overwhelmed. I give them some tools how to first cut through the overwhelm, and then I say, well, you have to focus on 3 to 5 things that really, really matter in that day. If you're able to do other things, great, but you focus on what's really important. And so that's how I operate.
Do you do that on paper or do you do it like with a computer tool, like an app or something like that?
I'm old school in that way.
Okay.
I do it on paper, and the reason is so I'm a writer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's some data out there about research about how when you write something with hand, you actually connect with the brain more. So I enjoy that. So I have an exercise. It's a morning pages exercise, but I call it the brain valve because I don't do it just in the morning, where I stream of consciousness. If I'm overwhelmed, anxious, or I just wake up, I just write 3 to 5 pages, stream of consciousness in my notebook. I don't read it afterwards. The idea is to empty my mind. Then I take a piece of paper and I write every single possible thing I think I need to do, from, brush my teeth to something bigger. And then I circle or I rewrite those that actually are most important.
It's interesting. A few guests ago, I had St. Rappaport on the show, and she was talking about this idea of a creative journal, or yeah, and
Mhm.
essentially like it wasn't more writing. I mean, you could write if you wanted to, but a lot of times they would just draw and just like simply draw pictures, write whatever, and it's
Mhm.
essentially that same thing of that brain dump, as they say in the para method, where
Yeah.
you're getting that everything, all that loose knowledge or ideas out of the brain, and then you can focus on details, and then it starts to refine after that.
Yep. That's
That's
the
crazy.
idea
That's
is the
good.
brain
Yeah.
is always working even when we're sleeping, right? So how
Mm.
do you clear it, remove all these hanging things and whatnot, so you can gain that clarity and focus.
And just to throw it out there, because I've been doing something similar with that with Notion. Notion's a tool. Notion.so is a app where it combines documents, tables, and databases, as well as Kanban boards, all in just one unique system.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been building a system like that where you can do the brain dump and bullet journal and then be able to retrieve it later on, stuff like that. It's kind of cool. I'm learning from different YouTubers about it too.
That, I mean, that is interesting. I'm a fan of everything in one spot
Mm-hmm.
because it's accessible. You don't
Yeah.
have to jump from one thing to another, right? So that integration,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it. And
I,
then it's more of a, I love technology. It's more of
mhm.
a, in terms of writing, I still use a pen and paper.
Yeah, well, like you said, there's a data on it too. I think that a lot of people prefer paper, so that's totally fine. I was just thinking if you wanted to digitize it after you wrote it or something like that, that might be interesting. And so it's interesting too because it leads me into the next question as well. How can we use systems to maximize our habits?
So I'm all about rituals, right?
Mhm.
Rituals that then after a while they become systemic, meaning you have a structure to how you're functioning. I don't like the idea of routine, right? Or because that becomes, routine for some of us, just a word is like, oh, that's boring.
Mm.
But when you think ritual, you connect with it at a deeper level. So systems can save time and can keep us going in the direction that makes more sense. I tend to talk more about systems when it comes to organizations than I do individuals. Individually, the system is really what's more important individually is how you manage yourself, right? So people talk about managing time. I encourage people to learn to manage yourself by figuring out when you're best at something, when you have
Yeah.
creative energy for work, when you should have meetings, when you should sleep, not because the world says you should do a certain way, but the way makes sense to you. For
Mhm.
organizations, systems are huge because systems cut unnecessary work, they cut unnecessary decisions. So the less we use our willpower, the less we use thinking to make decisions, the easier our lives are, and the more time and creative energy do we have to focus on things that matter. And that's big in organizations, but then of course personally as well. So in order to view it that way, you have to look at it systemically and say, okay, how am I going to go from here to here? And
Mhm.
how do I maximize everything that's in between or automate it and so on? And people a lot of times don't do it. So one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, I woke up at this, I was planning to wake up between 5 and 6. But then I woke up at 6:15 and I felt terrible because I was now, 75 minutes late. And then to what I had planned, then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but then I wasn't sure. Then I was feeling this way. So that's because there's no system, right? And there's no
Mhm.
ritual. If you create less room for failure for yourself and you make, let's say, you decide what's your 20% the next day from your to-do list, you decide that the night before, you don't have to think about it. That's a
Mhm.
function, that's a way how you put yourself in that rhythm. Once you're in the rhythm, body motion stays in motion.
Yeah.
That's that movement, right?
Well, and that's fascinating too, because the way you're explaining it is a bit more, I would even say spiritual, but also just kind of this appealing to the logic and emotional sides of the brain. And what's interesting too, I've mentioned in Notion, I've been watching YouTube channels about that with August Bradley. He's talking a lot about setting things up the night before, as well as having a
Mm-hmm.
ritual in the morning and using all those in Notion too. But more importantly, just establishing it, whether it's paper or Notion, doesn't matter. Just acknowledging that it needs to be done. And you mentioned there too, kind of knowing your circadian rhythm. You didn't use that word particularly, but knowing when you need to sleep and when you
That's
have your energy. And yeah,
right.
that's great.
And
Fascinating.
there's so many people that spend time. I was one of them. I tried
Mhm.
because I saw all these people waking up really, really early. I never did as a kid. I have my natural rhythm is not at 11 o'clock at night. I'm going to get energy.
Mhm.
So how am I going to get up next day at 5 in the morning? That said, once entire summer, I was determined to make myself a morning person. Without a fail, every night around 11:30, I got a boost of energy. It didn't matter. My alarm was set for 5 and I was going to get up. I still had those rhythms. And so I realized, well, I'm forcing myself to do something that's inherently not natural to me. If it changes as I grow older, great. But for now, we have to honor our body. We have to honor our wiring in order to maximize
well, and
our
there's
potential.
different people have different wirings. And so, it's interesting that you mentioned 11 p.m. Mine's 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., but mainly the evening, where like when I hit those 10 o'clock peaks, it's one of those where I get the energy most so. And so I remember being in high school and the third period where that 10 a.m. hits, okay, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. And then like for 2 classes before that, I'm just barely dragging through the day. It's just insane.
And we don't honor that, right? Always.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that, but you were mentioning Henry Ford earlier and how he established actually a system of the 9 to 5 that we still follow today. And I'm really excited with COVID actually, because it's changed a lot of the ways people work from home. And Twitter, for example, completely said, you know what, screw it. You can all work from home from now on. That's fine. And it's just interesting how that's going to change a lot of things and acknowledging people's own rhythms because of that.
Well, and it's also showing, right? The pandemic has shown how many artificial rules can be changed when there's need. And this is consistent with leadership in other areas. And this is what we talked about, right? It's narrow, this is how we've always done it. I don't know that's going to work. Well, why not? You don't know until you try it. And if you think it through, especially when people are asking for something that you might be more successful with, why not explore it? And it's interesting, Benjamin Franklin, so in his biography, he talks about this thing of breaking your day in 8 hours increments. But we have to look at the context of some of these things. It was an agricultural society. We didn't have they lived off of a candlelight and or the daylight. So it made sense. You woke up at 5 in the morning and then you worked up to a certain point while you could be out on the field. And then at night, with candlelight, there's only so much you can do. So those things translated to this day when people talk about, you got to get up early and make things happen and stuff. And for some people, absolutely. But we're not all, cookie cutter. We need uniqueness to ourselves. What works best for me, and how do I incorporate that in relation to the world, my family, partner, project, work, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, and pivoting to another question here too, I think that it's interesting that you mentioned this before, but just like the character on the show, Lucifer, you help people find their deepest desires. And what's funny is I actually was watching Lucifer today and yesterday because I like the show. There's a new season I haven't caught up on yet. But I was thinking, what if I was actually watching it subconsciously to study this next guest?
And so, possible.
Yeah. How do you do that? How do you help people find their desires? And what is it that you truly desire too?
Oh, nice one. Nice try. Didn't work on me though.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. A really good friend of mine called me up, I think a couple of years ago, and she's like, I saw you on TV. I'm like, what do you mean you saw me on TV? She's like, yeah, this show, Lucifer. And I'm like, okay, where is this going? And essentially the premise was, so what do I try to do? Is I try to bring out what is people's greatest desire for life. Right? What does this amazing life look like? And in order to do that, I have to really connect with people. There has to be a lot of trust. And I do have a skill or two in terms of connecting, figuring it out. So that's where, and I appreciate, his sort of charm and how he's like discovering himself in the TV show, the self-awareness growing in it, even though he's got none in the beginning. That's interesting about the new season is, which I absolutely thought was fantastic.
Let's not spoil too much for anybody too.
Huh?
Let's not talk too many spoilers, just in case.
I'm not.
Okay.
But the idea that in order to pursue your desire, you need to overcome your fears.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the parallel of the two. I was like, this is awesome. And that said, what is your greatest desire?
You're trying to turn it up. I'll answer that question if you answer first, my friend.
All right. My greatest desire is to impact the world on a large scale while living a fully human life. And what that means is getting to as many people as I can, because there is a way to be fulfilled, to feel strong, confident, happy, true to yourself, live authentically, while also experiencing it all. And experiencing it all means wrestling with the pain, savoring the joy, the pleasure, and then everything in between, right? The richness of life. So once we're done with this experience here, we can look back and not go in the perfect shape, we're out, but actually go worn out and empty of all the possibilities, right? There's nothing left because we lived such an extraordinary life. So I want that for myself. That's my greatest desire. And then I want to share that with others and help others do the same.
Well, and the first thing I'm a coach as well. I've taught swim lessons for almost a decade, and it's one of those things where my inclination is to next ask, how do you want to do that then? I mean, granted, speaking and content creation, I think, is one of the best ways to scale up your message. But then how can you, that's a very big macro goal. How do you want your micro goals to get there to be?
So, and that's where the humility comes in, right? Well, I have a, smart ass answer, which is watch me.
Yeah.
But tangible is, our life is happening right in front of us today. I don't know whether I have tomorrow. Yesterday has passed. So what I can do is, how can I make a difference today? So right now, our conversation is all that matters. When I was walking my dog earlier, saying hello to people, interacting with people, reaching out, giving my 100% to my clients, all of those are ways that I'm living this purpose out and this desire. And times when when the fear comes in of inadequacy, of, I could do better, or, I don't know how I feel, all those different things. I look at the fear in the face and, as Pink says, I just don't care.
Yeah.
And I keep going, right? So that's the micro level, is day to day. I can't, there's the idea of purpose. Someday when I get to that point, I will have achieved it. That's a recipe for a lot of misery. Purpose is right here, and all I can do is live it out today as best as I can with what's in front of me.
Love it. And I think that too, you take it a very positive mindset approach too, which is important. And then to answer your question too, because you asked me, I can't skip past that too. My deepest desire is to help the world become a type 1 civilization on the card-to-scale scale, which means that we are efficiently running the entire planet's energy source efficiently, not sustainably is the most way to go about it. All the energies that are going on, including weather and even terraforming, I guess you could even say, we have the power to do so on our planet. And that's where we're leading towards. We're about 0.75 on the scale. And so we're almost there when it comes to being a type 1, so to speak. And the reason why we haven't been there is because of course, global warmings make a difference, but sustainability, resources. I learned just recently that Singapore, some place that we would envision to be a very modern city, and it's a very modern country too, I always thought it was a super sustainability hub. Turns out they don't do any recycling. They have no solar panels. They have very little sustainability energy producing sources. And it's like, okay, well, place like that, you would presume would have it. And I think that's a good prime example of, like, if they don't have it, what about the rest of the world? And so I want to help, especially with the SDGs by the United Nations. There was 2 in particular that really motivated me, education and energy. And I want to use those in a macro sense, but also in a micro sense as well, through what I'm doing with PolyInnovator. And that's one thing that I think will answer your question.
That's great. And that's a great example of what we were talking about, confirmation bias or assumptions, right? We assume these things about modern city, sort of a big city, rich city, that they're going to have these things in place, and then you discover they don't. And the only reason you discovered it is because you were willing to actually find out. And that's how you find out who else is not doing it and how they can get there. So what's the biggest obstacle in achieving that desire?
Me. This is an interview about you, so I don't want to get too much on my end, but I think that you actually would be able to help me out. I think thinking about it differently is because before PolyInnovator, I started a brand called the United Living Construct, which was meant to be a hub of innovation and foster uniters, people who would unite people, leaders, which are similar, but not, they're more operational, and then creators. And those are the 3 kind of people who I wanted to bring together. And someone who was all 3 would be like a Polyocian or PolyInnovator in this now newer term sense. And so that was the steps that I wanted to do for it. But I found out, and I mentioned this before our call, that I didn't think I was good enough for it yet. And I realized that I wasn't really. I had to have that self-awareness to learn more and become more. And that's where I'm at
Sure.
now. So I'm trying to become more.
Well, I'm more than happy to help you get there and see it differently. Because there's no reason you shouldn't, you and everybody else shouldn't pursue their wildest desires. And even if you don't achieve them, well, at least you gave it your all. And that in of itself is a success.
Well, and this is actually right below the Lucifer question, ironically, is how can someone achieve their desires?
So you find out what they are. You get really, really honest with what those desires are. And if they're constructive, they're obviously no way hurtful or harmful to others or the planet and so on. You find a way, you make a plan. You figure out the path. You also figure out what's preventing you, like you do, which is fabulous. And really, congratulations for being self-aware that you are your own obstacles. That's usually, we are our own worst enemy, as they say. So really, it's coming up with that plan and then being honest if you don't know what that plan is, and then getting help, hiring a coach or reading or getting to the seminars, ideally all of it, so you can figure out how to live them out and not get scared. We're far more scared of our own success than we're of the failure. Our brain is designed, our mind is designed to look for danger, which means we're a lot more comfortable with it, a little bit more pessimistic always. It's a lot harder to envision and have the courage to pursue that stuff, which is pursue your desires. So the way you do it is by actually honoring them. Now there's a wall there's my quote in my old my office building that says it's what I believe is a vision. Vision is not something you actually can achieve. Vision is something that's so compelling that keeps pulling you. It's so compelling, it's so authentic that you have no way but pursue it. And so that's what you do. So you figure out what is that desire, and then you create a vision that you just have to chase. And then everything in between is how, right? How and who helps you on the way.
Well, and I think that you're mentioning fears too, and how we are very susceptible to them. There was actually an example I wanted to use earlier. I don't remember which question it was, but it was something that I thought was really resonating with both that one and this one. I teach some lessons, personal training, and both my clients actually that I can think of right now kept saying, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I've had multiple clients all throughout the years say that. And it's like, no saying I can't. Like that's a rule. You can't say that because, for example, I had a swim lesson. This little girl who's very strong and brave, and I know she can physically and emotionally do it. I threw a toy down at the bottom of the 7 feet pool, and she's like, oh, she's done it countless times of doing it. But the problem was she would come up and take a breath and come over. So I told her to go straight to the toy and straight back. Not really that big of a deal, but she's like, oh, I can't do that. I don't know. I don't think I can do that. It's like, you haven't tried. Like, you haven't literally tried. Like, you mentioned Yoda earlier in Star Wars. Like, Yoda says there is no try, just do. It's like, do it. And if you fail, oh, well.
That's the thing. We trip ourselves because, fear is the devil's greatest illusion. And as Lucifer tells us something different, the TV show. Yeah. But it's that idea that we can't something. Well, how the hell do you know? And listen, if I believed every single person, including some people who are very, very close to me in my surroundings, if I listen every time they said I can't do something, I would not be talking to you right now.
Yeah.
I would have a completely different life. So that idea it's the oldest story in the book. Yes, you can. It just, and Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right.
Right. You'd be an engineer right now.
Miserable one at that.
So you actually talked about vision earlier, and it's funny, I don't know if you are doing this on purpose or not, but the conversation's flowing pretty perfectly into each of the questions here. And so how can someone create an authentic vision for themselves worth fighting for?
Take the time to get to know yourself, who you truly are. Acknowledge your own goodness, which means your own fundamental goodness, which means you have the right base, right foundation to dare greatly, right? To be in that arena that Teddy Roosevelt talks about, to create something that's authentic to you. And then what is that? Envision it, create it, allow yourself to dream. Now, there's quite a few techniques that we could use to get a person there, and I use them with my clients. But the idea is you crystallize it, you make it so compelling, and then obviously you create a path to get there. But the vision has to be authentic. It has to be based not in what you learned as a kid, but what you truly believe, what is really compelling. This is the distinction between people who say, oh, I want to be a millionaire because whatever, my dad did it or whatnot. They don't necessarily acknowledge that, but they're just like repeating the cycle, and it's not authentic to them. I can't tell you how many people I've met who tell me they're doing one thing, and I'm like, no, you shouldn't be on that path. One of my favorite meetings was this friend of a friend reached out to me. She's like, can we please talk? I'm switching careers from sales. I want to be a coach, a life coach. That's now up and coming. Everybody wants to be a coach. So she's like, can we talk? We talk. I'm like, absolutely, happy to help you, whatnot. We were talking, and I immediately spot that the stuff she's talking about is not really what she wants. And in that conversation, by the end of the conversation, she realized she wanted something very, very different. It was tangential. It was related in the sense that it was teaching, it was helping people, but it wasn't coaching. It was something very, very different. And she pursued that. She moved. She's now in Florida. She's doing great things. But people don't do that. And she thought she had a great vision. She told me all the things she was going to do. And I'm looking at her, I'm thinking, you're off. Because it doesn't come from here. It comes from your mind. So not from your kind of core. The vision has to come from within, because when it gets tough, and life does get tough, you're not going to be able to chase it and to have the grit to resilience to get it done if it's not from within, if it's just intellectual exercise. And that's why people fail so often in their pursuit of vision.
It's interesting. And I do find that there is some points where intellectual and wow, I can't speak. I'll cut that out part. Intellectual aspects of thoughts, and even if it doesn't come from your why or your vision, there are some thought processes that actually do create that success. For example, just exercise. There was one day I did not want to work out, but there were certain logical processes. It had nothing to do with my why or why I was working out, but more of just like, hey, you said you're going to do this. Logically speaking, you're going to do it. And I didn't let myself get the emotional aspect behind it and let myself emotionally drain myself. I just chose to logically focus on that action. And so I think there is points behind the logic base, but it's much more powerful when you can do the visionary one.
And so this is what you're talking about, is a distinction between so that greater vision that you're pulled towards. So that's why you weren't questioning, oh, you want to work out. Your emotions are tired and so on. That's a temporary. What I'm talking about is this like a sense of flow. In Star Wars, the Force. Joseph Campbell, the hero journey, talks about that experience of life. So that pull is the vision, right? In terms of what you experienced is playing a little bit of a willpower, right? So you're, okay, this makes sense. This is how I'm going to do it. So you were kind of negotiating with your brain to take you there while ignoring this impulse, which was, don't go work out. So that's sort of how I go if I want to not eat ice cream, but I go and I window shop and then I walk out, because I've decided I'm not going to get ice cream. I just want to see what's out there. So, but the willpower says get out, because I know where I want to be, and that does not include an ice cream. And this is maybe like a light example of it, but it's not in vacuum. They both have to come together, both intellect and emotion. If you have only one or the other, you're going to be out of balance, and that creates problems.
My key principle, which is actually something I ask a lot of people before they come into the show, what are your principles to life? I have just one that I always think about, and the key to life is balance and finding that balance, regardless of what particular subject, but just finding balance. And so you've written 2 books. And so what are those books for those who haven't read them?
Sure. So my first book I wrote in 2014. It's called Own It, A Practical Guide to Defying the Odds and Claiming Your Life. It's a book I wish I had when I was a 17-year-old. It's also a book that a lot of older people have read, a lot more than the 17-year-olds, and found it very helpful. It's a guide that covers how do you figure out yourself, how do you figure out your education, your career, your money, and your relationships. So those are the 5 sections in the book. It's a pretty fast read. It's written in a very simple, very direct, tone. Some of the feedback I received about the book is that it doesn't have sort of heart-wrenching stories from my life that I could have incorporated, but that's by design because it is a guide. It's supposed to be very, very accessible, and it's a cute, small little book that 200 pages that I take great pride in because there's a lot of good stuff. It's packed with a lot of good answers and a lot of, to me, it's common sense. It turns out it's not. So that's why I wrote it. The second one is, it's a book I wrote. It's called Once in Love, Always in Love. I wrote that book with a priest friend of mine, a Catholic priest. He died before we finished the book. But he was the guy who founded the center that I ran. The Center for Spirituality was the first of its kind in the United States when he founded it in the 60s. He was all about bringing people together. And he, in his spare time, he helped 6,500 orphans find home in 20 countries. So he was quite a unique human being, and he was all about love, but love in the broadest sense. And so before he died, we decided to work on the book. It's written in his voice, but obviously, me writing it includes some messages from his friends. But the book is, as people described it, it'll make you cry, it'll make you laugh. It chronicles his life, but throughout chronicling that life, it touches on all kinds of topics. How do you deal with rejection and being abandoned? How do you, when you fall in love, or at least when you express love to someone, you can never take it back. You're always in love with that person in that moment in time. A person might leave, but if you actually loved someone, you can't say, well, now give me back with the love I gave you. So it's very much a spiritual discourse. And he goes into sort of the balance, what's happening in the world today. He grew up at the time, people hid under the tables thinking there's a nuclear bomb is going to explode. He also hung out with John Wayne once. So the guy was very, very charismatic, interesting stories, but very much a message of compassion and unity and understanding and interfaith dialogue, love and helping one another. So that's the second one. Very different than the first one, very different style as well. But it's I'm biased, but I think they're both great reads.
Well, I don't think there has to be cohesiveness between your books that you write. It's just a matter of is the importance of that book there, and obviously they are. But I'm saying do you need to get that voice out there, and you did. And so, what is you mentioned how you mentioned a third book before the show? What is that all about?
Well, that's the Entreployment. That's how the case for it and how do you do it, right? So it's a lot more leadership driven, because that was one of the things I heard from people when I published the first two was you have this extensive leadership experiences, both indirectly and indirectly by working with people. Put that in. And so, so that's, and I'm thinking in terms of like where we are right now, is the most natural next step. How do I help organizations, especially so many organizations struggling with nature of work is changing forever because of the pandemic. So how do we, and hopefully, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, there could be more equity and diversity and inclusion, proper inclusion, real inclusion, and Entreployment covers that. Entreployment includes that. So that's the next one. I have like two other ones that are in the pipeline, but
if you look at
get to them.
If you look at the pipeline for the PolyInnovator library that I'm going to be writing down the future, it's like there's 6 that I'm working on right now, and then another 6 beneath that are like ideas. It's like, I get you. When you're that creative, it's hard to push anything down, so to speak. So what is the purpose of Think Change then too? We kind of mentioned it a bit.
So Think Change, so it's a consultancy. It's an umbrella company that I own, and the idea behind it is, so the name came about. I saw this Think Change, like a little postcard, like 15 years ago, and it resonated with me because the change is the only constant in life. The reason why we are so uncomfortable and we suffer is because we struggle. We want that permanency, which doesn't exist, right? So we struggle with change. Think about it. We are in this blue marble that's spinning around itself and around the sun in an ever expanding universe. So when we have that, there's discomfort that comes from that consistent change.
Yeah,
So the
the
way
entropy.
we, exactly, the way we seize the great life and great organizations is if we embrace change. So instead of resisting it, instead of being so anti it, we embrace it as a way, as a conduit to growth. So that's the, you know, we're always in that motion of change. We're anticipating change. So that way it's not change for the sake of change like organizations do, or it's change when it's too late and everybody's freaking out, or it's a shock to people. Oh my God, we need to change. It's, you're in this rhythm of looking at yourself as, oh, I'm changing and I'm growing. That's our natural state. So embracing it individually and collectively leads to a much better outcomes. So that's where the name came from. And then as a business, we focus on several areas. So coaching, leadership training, executive business and life coaching, and as well as consulting in the areas of business strategy, branding, sort of writing your story, as well as sort of global interconnectedness and communication. So in other words, doing business abroad or between countries and then communicating. So it's a kind of a several fields, but they tie to each other.
Polymathic in a way. And so
Yes.
that is interesting that how that think changed. I swear I saw that same picture or a card or something like that, because I think I've recognized that idea. And something similar happened to me. I resonate with you because I think that there was either it was the Gandhi quote of be the change you want to see in the world, or some other kind of image that said make a change, or just something like, or no, it was the song We Are the World. And there was one line that said make a change. And that one line stuck with me. And when I created the United Living Construct before, that hashtag make a change was stuck with me ever since. I still use it now. So I'll make sure I put both of those in there, think change and make a change, and the description to this episode, because I think it's super cool.
That is awesome. And the idea is there's so much opportunity to do that. And when we do that, we actually, everybody benefits in making a change, right? And I love that song, We're the World, right? The unitedness of that, how people came together first for, you know, famine and then other causes. So it's great.
Well, the Spanish version is really good too. Somos el mundo. I love it.
Yeah. I think, what is it? Enrique Iglesias is in it, or one of the,
Yeah. There's so many people in that one too. So what is your goals for your own personal brand, and how are you going to own it?
So, so it's really, I think so that's interesting about when you talk about a brand. I tend to believe that I'm a human, right? It's me. I'm not necessarily a brand. I just have to authentically show up in the world. So my plan for it is to show up more, right? And that's kind of clicked with me because until now, I really was, until this year, I was very much focused on, most of my business came from referrals, actually like 98% of it. People talk about the work they do with me, and then they tell others, and then it grows. So what I decided is, okay, it's time to scale, and not in a business sense only, but looking for ways to reach more people. So to answer your question, is to show up more for more people, including those who never heard about me. So like you and your listeners, many of them, most of them, all of them probably have never heard about me. Well, here I'm showing up and I have something to say, and I have certain tools that I'd like to utilize to help other people. So I'm on this mission, right? And the mission is very, very personal. The mission of helping people find their truest desires and pursue them, face the fear and embrace courage, live fully, live a life they love, build organizations they love. And the reason for that is, if I can do that for you and you do that for other people, there's a ripple effect of that goodness. If we create a world like that, what I saw, my earliest memory of a bomb exploding outside of our window, people trying to kill us, hopefully we're going to limit that kind of thing. Hopefully we're going to limit violence, because people who feel good about themselves, love themselves, they're not scared of other people. They are curious. They seek to understand. They are open-minded and willing, recognizing there's enough room for all of us. And so that kind of, so I'm on that mission. It's very, very personal. So I have this thing, if my clients don't succeed, neither do I. I get very, it keeps me up at night, because my mission is not accomplished, right? If I'm not impacting people in that way. So that's kind of how I will live it out, this authenticity, my name.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. Like your legacy and your personal brand is just an online reputation. It's just your
Of
reputation
course.
in general. And I think that too, with you joining Matchmaker and going on shows, like you said, you have a few already lined up after this as well. So that's good. I think it's a good way to start out too. That's good on this new
Thank
change.
you. Thank you.
So where can people find you online then if they want to find out more?
So the best way, I'm on social media. So if people look up my name, Adi Redzic, they can find me. It's easy. There aren't many of us. But also the first place that I tell people is my website, adiredzic.com. And that's where I'm at. I always encourage people, reach out, connect with me, shoot me an email, or connect on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm not a big, to me, the whole celebrity thing, I need to be, followers and all that stuff. I don't suffer from that. I shouldn't really say suffer, but that's not a priority for me, right? So I like people to, connect, reach out, see if I can offer them some value. And given what I just said about this mission that I'm on, adiredzic.com/book, and people can sign up for a 30-minute free session, coaching session, where we explore how we can work together, where people are at, what they're looking for, and whether I can be of help. If I can't, I refer them to others, or I flat out say I don't have the skills. But if I can, then we jump into getting some work done and changing themselves and changing the world.
Right. I'll make sure I have things in the description for a lot of those too. So don't worry. And then
Awesome.
what can people do as like a call to action for the audience today then? To grow.
So I think in our conversation, we touched on some really important topics, right? We touched on people pursuing their deepest desires, deepest dreams. We touched on people allowing themselves to be versatile, being diverse, being polymaths, learning, allowing themselves to really be passionate about things and face their fears and change and so on, transform. So I think the call to action would be is spread this message to other people, share it with other people. What did you learn from it? Validate you or I, right? That what we talked about was actually helpful to them. And of course, do take me up on the offer to talk and to get some coaching if you want, or if people want. So I think that's the call to action. But fundamentally, live a life you love. If you can't do that, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Or at least if you can't chase it.
Right? Yeah. Find Lucifer right here. And then speaking of hell, right there. And then once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and this is Adi Redzic on the Polymath Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.